The deluge begins. The rain had been falling on Aquaria Prime for 17 days straight. What started as unusual weather had transformed into a catastrophic deluge that turned the low-lying capital city into a drowning maze of submerged streets and collapsing buildings. Captain Jake Morrison gripped the controls of his cargo cruiser, the Maverick, as he navigated through what had once been the prosperous merchant district. Through the rain-streaked viewport, he could see the chaos unfolding below. Aquarian citizens scrambled for higher ground, their distinctive pale green skin glistening wet as they fought against rising waters. The Aquarian government had activated emergency evacuation protocols, but Jake had noticed a disturbing pattern over the past 3 days. Only certain neighborhoods received rescue priority. "Maverick, this is Port Authority," a clipped voice crackled through his comm system. "You are ordered to clear the restricted zone immediately. All commercial vessels must report to upper district docking stations." Jake's jaw tightened. The restricted zone encompassed the lower city districts, where working-class Aquarians lived. The same people now being left to fend for themselves while government vessels ferried the wealthy to safety. "Port Authority, I'm experiencing navigational difficulties." Jake lied smoothly. "Need another 20 minutes to clear the turbulence." He cut the comm before they could respond, knowing he'd just bought himself the short window before they sent enforcers. But something about this disaster felt wrong. Aquaria Prime had advanced meteorological systems. These floods shouldn't have caught anyone by surprise. Discovery in the depths. Jake banked the Maverick around a partially submerged tower, its elegant spires now jutting from the water like broken fingers. That's when he saw them. 2 figures huddled on the rooftop of a 3-story building that was actively crumbling into the churning waters below. Even from a distance, he could tell they were Aquarian. The taller figure, a woman, had her arms wrapped protectively around a smaller form, a child. Her long, flowing hair was plastered to her shoulders, and her simple clothing marked her as lower class. As Jake brought the cruiser closer, he could see her face more clearly. She was beautiful in the distinctive Aquarian way, with high cheekbones, large expressive eyes that shifted colors with her emotions, and skin that held an almost translucent quality. But there was something different about her. Her skin tone was slightly darker than typical Aquarians, with faint markings along her neck that suggested mixed heritage. A half-blood, Jake realized. That explained why no one had stopped to help. The child in her arms, a girl of perhaps 7 years old, had similar features. Her eyes were wide with fear, but she didn't cry. She simply clung to her mother with absolute trust. Jake watched as 2 Aquarian rescue vessels passed within 50 meters of the rooftop without slowing. One pilot actually looked directly at the stranded pair, then deliberately turned away. "Bastards," Jake muttered, anger flaring hot in his chest. The rescue. He brought the Maverick down as close to the rooftop as he dared. The building groaned ominously beneath the strain of the floodwaters, chunks of masonry breaking away and tumbling into the churning depths below. Jake activated the external speakers. "I'm coming down to get you. Hold tight." The woman's head snapped up, her eyes shifting from desperate gray to surprised amber. She pulled her daughter closer, as if afraid this might be a trick. Jake deployed the emergency ladder and climbed down, the rain immediately soaking through his flight jacket. The wind buffeted him as he descended, and he had to grip the rungs tightly to avoid being blown off. When his boots hit the rooftop, the surface shifted beneath him. The entire building was moments from collapse. "Give me your hand," he shouted over the roar of wind and rain. The woman hesitated, her eyes searching his face. In them, Jake saw not just fear of the flood, but fear of him, of trusting another person who might betray her. "Please," he said more softly, extending his hand. "I want to help." It was the child who made the decision. She reached out with one small hand, her fingers wrapping around Jake's thumb. "Mama, the human will save us. I know it." The simple faith in her voice seemed to break through the mother's defenses. She shifted her daughter to one arm and grasped Jake's hand with the other. Her skin was cool and slightly damp, but her grip was strong. "I'm Jake," he said, helping them toward the ladder. Lyria, she replied, her voice melodic despite the chaos. This is Sarah. A massive crack split the air as a support beam gave way inside the building. The rooftop tilted sharply, and Jake grabbed Lyria around the waist to keep her from sliding off. She gasped at the contact, but didn't pull away. Sarah first, Lyria said firmly, lifting her daughter toward the ladder. Jake nodded, impressed by her composure. He helped the little girl onto the ladder, keeping one hand on her back as she climbed. She moved with surprising agility, her small fingers finding each rung surely. Lyria followed, and Jake brought up the rear. They were halfway up when the building finally surrendered to the flood. With a thunderous roar, it collapsed into the water, sending waves radiating outward that rocked the Maverick violently. Jake hauled himself into the cruiser behind Lyria and Sarah, slamming the hatch shut, just as a wave crashed against the hull. He stumbled toward the pilot's seat, firing the engines and pulling them up and away from the devastation below. Immediate aftermath. Once they were at a safe altitude, Jake set the autopilot and turned to check on his passengers. Lyria and Sarah sat huddled together on the cargo bench, soaked and shivering despite the cruiser's heating system. "Medical kits in the locker behind you," Jake said, grabbing emergency thermal blankets from a storage compartment. "Let me make sure you're both okay." Lyria pulled Sarah closer, a protective gesture that spoke of past hurt. "Why did you help us? You saw what we are. Half-bloods. Your company regulations forbid transporting unauthorized passengers." Jake paused, meeting her shifting eyes steadily. "I saw 2 people who needed help. That's all that mattered." He wrapped the blankets around them both, his hands gentle. Sarah looked up at him with wonder, her eyes shifting to a soft golden color. "Are all humans this nice?" "Some are," Jake said with a small smile. "Just like some Aquarians are good and some aren't. People are people, no matter what they look like." Lyria's expression softened slightly. She accepted the cup of hot broth Jake offered, helping Sarah drink first before taking a sip herself. The simple act of kindness seemed to overwhelm her, and tears mixed with the rainwater on her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm not usually this emotional. It's just, no one has shown us kindness in so long." Jake settled into the co-pilot seat, giving them space, like staying close enough to talk. "What happened? Why were you left behind?" Lyria's eyes darkened to a deep purple, the color of grief. "My husband died 6 months ago, Dr. Varen Kellis. He was a meteorologist with the Planetary Weather Bureau." "Was?" Jake prompted gently. "They said it was an accident, a fall from his laboratory balcony." Lyria's voice was bitter. "But Varen was always careful, and in the weeks before his death, he'd been troubled. He said the weather patterns were wrong, that something catastrophic was coming." Jake leaned forward, his interest sharpening. He predicted the floods. More than that, he tried to warn the High Council. He had data, projections showing that the atmospheric processors were failing, that without immediate intervention, the entire lower city would be underwater within weeks. Lyria pulled Sarah closer. They dismissed him, called him an alarmist. 2 days later, he was dead. "And his family?" Jake asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "Varen's family never accepted me. A pure-blood Aquarian marrying someone with Tyrellian ancestry was shameful to them. After he died, they disowned Sarah and me completely. We lost our home, our status, everything." Her eyes met Jake's. "When the evacuations began, we were on the restricted lists. Too poor, too mixed blood to marry." Jake felt a familiar anger burning in his chest. He'd seen this pattern before, on other worlds, in other disasters. The powerful protecting their own while abandoning everyone else. "Your husband's data," he said carefully. "Do you still have it?" Lyria hesitated, then slowly reached into her clothing and withdrew a small, waterproof data chip. "Varen gave this to me the night before he died. He said if anything happened to him, I should keep it safe, that it contained proof." "Proof of what?" "That the High Council knew the floods were coming, that they had months to prepare, to evacuate, to strengthen the infrastructure, but they didn't, because the construction companies paid them not to, because emergency repairs would have cost too much, hurt the economy, disrupted the profitable tourist season." Jake stared at the small chip, understanding the weight of what she carried. "That's why they left you behind. You're not just inconvenient, you're dangerous. Lyria nodded, fear flickering across her face. If they knew I had this, they'd make sure you disappeared, Jake finished grimly. As night fell and the rain continued its relentless assault on the drowning city, Jake set course for the human embassy compound on the northern plateau. It was the only safe place he could think of, though getting there would be risky. Sarah had fallen asleep curled against her mother's side, exhausted by their ordeal. Lyria stroked her daughter's hair with gentle fingers, her eyes distant. You're good with her, Jake observed quietly. She's all I have left of Varen, Lyria replied. She has his curiosity, his kindness. Every day she grows more like him. Tell me about him. Lyria's eyes shifted to a soft blue, the color of fond memories. He was brilliant, passionate about his work, but never too busy for us. He used to take Sarah cloud watching, teaching her the names of different formations. A sad smile touched her lips. He said every scientist should start by learning to really see the world around them. Jake found himself drawn into her story, into the love that still radiated from her voice when she spoke of her late husband. It reminded him painfully of his own loss. I had a family once, he found himself saying. Wife and daughter. They died in a mining accident on Kepler 442b. The company knew the tunnels were unstable, but they pushed for production anyway. When the collapse came, he swallowed hard. I was off-world on a supply run, got back to find I'd lost everything. Lyria's hand found his, her cool fingers squeezing gently. I'm sorry. That's why I quit the big companies, Jake continued. Went independent. Figured I'd rather live by my own rules, even if it meant less money. Because following their rules cost me everything that mattered. Their eyes met and something passed between them. A recognition of shared pain. Of understanding what it meant to lose the world you'd built and have to find a reason to keep going. Sarah is my reason, Lyria whispered. I wake up every day and choose to keep fighting because she deserves a future, a chance to grow up in a world that values her for who she is, not what bloodline she carries. She'll have that chance, Jake promised. I'll make sure of it. Lyria studied his face, searching for deception or false hope. Instead, she saw only honest determination. Slowly, tentatively, she smiled. It transformed her features, making her even more beautiful. Why do I believe you? She asked softly. Because you're smart enough to recognize the truth when you hear it, Jake replied, with a slight grin. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then the cruiser's proximity alarm blared, shattering the peace. Warning, the automated system announced. Aquarian security vessels approaching. Authorization requested. Jake's jaw tightened as he moved to the pilot's seat. Through the viewport, he could see 3 sleek security cruisers converging on their position, their running lights cutting through the rain like predatory eyes. They found us, Lyria breathed, fear stark in her voice. Not yet they haven't, Jake said grimly, his hands flying across the controls. Hold on tight, things are about to get interesting. As the Maverick dove toward the storm-lashed city below, Jake knew his simple act of rescue had just become something far more complicated. But looking at Lyria's determined face and the sleeping child in her arms, he knew he'd make the same choice again. Some things were worth fighting for. Some people were worth saving, no matter the cost. The storm raged on, but inside the Maverick, 3 survivors had found something unexpected. Hope. The government's pursuit. The security cruisers matched Jake's descent, their more powerful engines closing the gap steadily. A harsh voice crackled through the comm system. Unregistered vessel Maverick, you are ordered to land immediately and surrender your passengers for questioning. Failure to comply will be considered an act of aggression against Aquarian sovereignty. Jake recognized the voice. High Overseer Malchus, one of the most powerful officials in the Aquarian government. The fact that he was personally leading this pursuit told Jake everything he needed to know about how desperately they wanted Lyria silenced. Maverick does not acknowledge, Jake replied, cutting the comm and throwing the cruiser into a sharp banking turn that sent them careening between 2 partially submerged towers. Lyria clutched Sarah tightly, the child now awake and wide-eyed with fear. They'll kill us, Lyria whispered. Malchus was one of the officials my husband tried to report. If he gets that data chip, he won't, Jake said firmly, pushing the engines to their limits. The Maverick wasn't designed for combat maneuvering, but Jake had learned a few tricks during his years of independent operation. He dove lower, skimming the floodwaters so closely that spray lashed against the viewport. The security cruisers followed, but their larker size made them less maneuverable in the tight spaces between buildings. There, Lyria pointed to a partially collapsed bridge, creating a narrow gap between twisted metal supports. They won't be able to follow through that. Jake didn't hesitate. He aligned the Maverick with the gap and accelerated. The cruiser's frame groaning in protest as they shot through with mere centimeters to spare on either side. Behind them, the lead security cruiser attempted to follow. Metal shrieked against metal as it wedged itself in the gap, blocking the other two vessels. "Nice call," Jake said, flashing Lyria a grin. She managed a shaky smile in return, her eyes shifting to relieved green. "My husband used to fly this route to his research station. I've memorized every shortcut." Seeking sanctuary. With their pursuers temporarily delayed, Jake set course for the human embassy compound. The journey took them over the devastated city, and even Sarah couldn't look away from the destruction below. Entire neighborhoods had vanished beneath the murky water. What buildings remained stood like lonely monuments to failed evacuation efforts. Here and there, Jake could see survivors stranded on rooftops, waving desperately at any passing vessel. "We should help them," Sarah said quietly, her small face pressed against the viewport. Jake's heart clenched. "We will, sweetheart. Once we get you and your mother to safety, I promise I'll come back with a bigger ship and rescue everyone I can." "You mean it?" the child asked, her eyes shifting to hopeful gold. "I mean it," Jake confirmed. Lyria watched this exchange with something like wonder in her expression. She'd been alone for so long, fighting every battle herself. Having someone else share the burden, someone who genuinely cared, felt almost surreal. "Tell me about Earth," she said suddenly, needing to think about something other than the danger pursuing them. Jake's expression softened. "It's got oceans like Aquaria Prime, but also vast continents. Mountains that touch the clouds, deserts that stretch forever, forests so thick you can barely see the sky." He smiled at the memory. "My daughter loved the forests. We used to camp in the Redwood Preserve every summer." "What was her name?" Lyria asked gently. "Emma. She was about Sarah's age when he trailed off, then seemed to gather himself. She loved singing, had a voice like an angel." Sarah, who had been listening intently, began to hum a soft melody. It was an Aquarian lullaby, one Lyria had sung to her countless times. But hearing it now, in this moment, brought tears to both adults' eyes. "That's beautiful," Jake said, his voice rough with emotion. "Mama taught me," Sarah said proudly. "She says music connects all hearts, no matter where we're from." Lyria met Jake's eyes, and something shifted between them. What had begun as gratitude was evolving into something deeper. A connection forged not just in crisis, but in shared loss, shared values, shared hope for something better. Jake reached out, and Lyria's hand met his halfway. Their fingers intertwined, cooled Aquarian skin against warm human flesh. Different, yet perfectly compatible. The moment was shattered by proximity alarms. New security vessels appeared on the sensors, cutting off their path to the embassy. "They've got the route blocked," Jake muttered, scanning for alternatives. "The old aqueduct system," Lyria said urgently. "It runs underground beneath the new city. Most of it should still be above the waterline." Jake nodded, spotting the ancient entrance on his nav display. He brought the Maverick down to street level, water spraying in their wake as he navigated toward the massive stone archway that marked the aqueduct entrance. The cruiser barely fit through the opening, scraping against centuries-old stone as they plunged into darkness. Jake activated the external lights, reviewing a tunnel that stretched ahead like the throat of some ancient beast. "This is crazy," he muttered, but his hands were steady on the controls. "Crazy is our specialty now," Lyria replied, and despite everything, she was smiling. The data revelation. They emerged from the aqueduct system directly into the human embassy compound, the Maverick rising from what appeared to be an ornamental fountain to the surprise of embassy security personnel. Ambassador Chen, a distinguished woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and sharper political instincts, met them in the secure briefing room an hour later. Jake, Lyria, and Sarah sat on one side of a polished conference table, while the ambassador reviewed the contents of Varen's data chip. "This is extraordinary," Chen said finally, her voice carefully neutral and explosive. "Dr. Kellis documented everything. The failing atmospheric processors, the ignored warnings, the bribes paid to council members." Her eyes fixed on Lyria. "Including evidence that High Overseer Malchus personally accepted over 2 million credits to suppress the meteorological reports." "Can you help us?" Lyria asked, her hand tight around Sarah. "The question is whether we should," Chen replied bluntly. "If we grant you asylum and release this information, it will cause a diplomatic crisis. The Aquarian government will claim we're interfering in internal affairs." "People are dying," Jake said, his voice hard. "The government let this happen because it was profitable." "How is exposing that interference?" Chen studied him. "You've already interfered, Captain Morrison. Your company has filed a formal complaint about your unauthorized rescue operations. They want you arrested and deported." "Then arrest me," Jake said without hesitation. "But help them first." Lyria's eyes widened, shifting to a shocked amber. "Jake, no." "He won't need to face arrest," Chen interrupted, "because I've decided to grant all 3 of you asylum." She smiled slightly at their surprised expressions. "The United Earth Coalition has been looking for an excuse to investigate Aquarian government corruption for years. This gives us the evidence we need." She turned to Lyria. "Dr. Kellis died trying to save lives. The least we can do is make sure his sacrifice wasn't in vain. With your permission, we'll release this data to every major news network in the sector." Lyria looked at Jake, who nodded encouragingly, then at Sarah, who said solemnly, "Papa would want people to know the truth." "Yes," Lyria said firmly. "Release it, all of it." Standing together. The next morning, the data went public. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Aquarian citizens, many of whom had lost homes and loved ones in the floods, took to the streets in peaceful protest. The few dry areas of the capital became seas of angry people demanding accountability. High Overseer Malchus appeared on public broadcasts, calling the evidence fabricated human propaganda. But his protests rang hollow when other council members began stepping forward, some confessing their own involvement in hopes of leniency, others condemning their colleagues to save themselves. Within the embassy's secure conference room, Jake and Lyria watched the chaos unfold on multiple screens. Sarah sat between them, holding both their hands. "It's working," Lyria whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "People are listening." "Your husband's work is finally being heard," Jake said, squeezing her hand. Ambassador Chen entered, accompanied by a tall Aquarian male in civilian clothing. "Miss Kellis, Captain Morrison, this is Councillor Veth. He represents the reform faction within the Aquarian government." Veth bowed respectfully, his eyes a sincere blue. "Miss Kellis, I knew your husband. He was a good man, a brilliant scientist. I'm ashamed I didn't stand with him when he needed support." He straightened, meeting her gaze directly. "I'm here to ask for your help. The people are demanding change, but they need leadership. Someone they can trust, someone connected to the truth." "I'm just a teacher," Lyria said, bewildered. "I'm not a politician." "You're the widow of a hero and a survivor of government persecution," Veth countered. "More importantly, you're someone who risked everything for the truth. That's the kind of leadership we need now." Lyria looked at Jake, uncertainty in her shifting eyes. He smiled encouragingly. "You can do this. I've seen your strength, your courage. These people need someone like you." "I'll help," Lyria said slowly, "but on one condition. Real reform. No more discrimination based on bloodlines or economic status. Everyone gets an equal chance." Veth nodded solemnly. "I'll fight for that alongside you." New beginnings. 6 weeks later, the waters had begun to recede. New atmospheric processors, hastily installed with human technical assistance, were stabilizing the weather patterns. Malchus and 17 other corrupt officials sat in detention awaiting trial. Jake stood on the balcony of temporary housing provided by the embassy, watching reconstruction efforts in the city below. Aquarian and human workers labored side by side, rebuilding what the floods had destroyed. Warm arms wrapped around him from behind, and he smiled as Lyria pressed her cheek against his back. Sarah is finally asleep. She wanted to stay up and plan her speech for the school integration ceremony tomorrow. Jake turned in her embrace, his hands settling on her waist. Over the past weeks, their relationship had deepened into something neither had expected, but both treasured. Love had found them in the aftermath of disaster, proving that even in darkness, hope could flourish. "She's amazing," Jake said, "just like her mother." Lyria's eyes shifted to soft pink, the Aquarian color of affection and desire. "I never thought I could feel this way again. After Varen, I believed that part of my life was over. And now," Jake asked softly, "now I understand that love doesn't replace what we've lost. It adds to it. Varen will always be Sarah's father, always be the man I loved. But that doesn't mean my heart can't make room for someone new." Jake cupped her face gently, his thumb tracing the delicate markings along her neck. "I love you, Lyria. I love your strength, your compassion, your fierce determination to build a better world. And I love Sarah as if she were my own." Tears glistened in Lyria's shifting eyes. "I love you too. You gave us more than rescue. You gave us a future." Their lips met in a kiss that tasted of promise and possibility. When they parted, Jake reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. In human culture, when we want to build a life with someone, to become family, we exchange these. He opened the box to reveal a simple ring made from intertwined earth silver and Aquarian crystal. "Lyria Kellis, will you and Sarah let me be part of your family? Not to replace what you've lost, but to add to what you have." Lyria's eyes cycled through a dozen colors, finally settling on brilliant gold, pure joy. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." As Jake slipped the ring onto her finger, Sarah's voice called from inside. "Did he ask yet? Did he ask?" They laughed as the little girl rushed onto the balcony, her face bright with excitement. "He did," Lyria confirmed, lifting Sarah into a three-way embrace with Jake. "So we're a family now?" Sarah asked, looking between them. "We're a family," Jake confirmed, his heart fuller than he'd thought possible. Below them, Aquaria Prime continued its slow recovery. There would be challenges ahead, political reforms to implement, infrastructure to rebuild, prejudices to overcome. But as Jake held Lyria and Sarah close, watching the first stars emerge in the clearing sky, he knew they would face it together. Sometimes the worst disasters brought out the best in people. Sometimes a simple act of compassion could spark a revolution. And sometimes, in the midst of chaos and loss, you found exactly what you needed most: a family, a purpose, a home. The floods had taken much, but they had also revealed truth and brought together three souls who would spend their lives making sure such tragedy never happened again. As Sarah began singing her lullaby, her voice pure and clear in the evening air, Jake and Lyria joined in. Three voices, human and Aquarian, blending in perfect harmony. A song of hope for a better tomorrow.